Hi, welcome to our first of two segments on writing for the ear. I know that a lot of students really are concerned that their delivery be lively, that their performance and presence in the pulpit be engaging and energetic and lively. And one of the things that I've come to really believe strongly is that a lot of that springs from good writing. It's not just a matter of you can't just take anything that's written down on a page and make it lively to hear. It depends upon being written well and written for the ear. And we write differently for the ear than we do for the eye, just as readers take in information differently than listeners do. And some theologians and with very capacity for dense and lengthy sentences that I admire very much are able to shift when they preach. One of my favorite examples of that is Will Willimon, who I think is a wonderful preacher and can, in his own way, be very lively and a very fun preacher. But this is one of his sentences on the Trinity and on Barth's the ontological status of disbelief. And you see that this sentence goes on and on and on, and that is not really an atypical sentence from that book. It was enjoyable read, but pretty dense. And here's Willimon preaching, and it seems, I forget the exact setting, but it seems like he's preaching in a poorly furnished campus theater with a panel watching him, and so he kind of gripes about that a little bit, and he says, "This is no way to preach. It's no place to preach. This is a sorry setting. I like a soaring neo-Gothic building like Duke Chapel." That's where he was normally preaching at the time he gave this sermon when he was the chaplain at Duke. Wrong time, wrong place, wrong purpose, wrong congregation. Look at these people, this panel. There's a time and a place for preaching, and this ain't it. Now, believe me, he did not use the word ain't in his books, his writings on Barth. So what else do we notice here about this writing compared to the first? By the way, this is a sermon called Untimely Word, and it's a preaching on Acts chapter 2. If you want to Google it, I'm sure you can find it. But what we notice are shorter sentences, more movement to the first person. I preach, I prefer, and this is more casual, more exaggeration, more repetition, and just a very more humor, conversational style here. So he is able to make that shift, and most of us probably aren't writing sentences about Barth like he is, and so we ought to be able to make the shift as well. So when I want to step back and just say there are many advantages to written communication. We need to just reckon with that as we write for the ear, that we are at a bit of a handicap as a communication mode. Oral communication is less efficient, and studies have shown that people do retain what they read better than what they hear. There are several things that we can do as readers that we can't do as hearers. One, we can control the pace of what we read. And two, we can review. We can go back over what we didn't catch. If we realize our attention has strayed during a paragraph, we just go back and reread it. We can write in the margins. We can get really engaged and underline and comment on things. So the research is clear. Written communication is more efficient, more and better received by listeners or readers. But there it lacks. So what does speech communication have in its favor? Immediacy, power to convict and move people and change hearts and minds right in the moment. Cicero was teaching people how. Cicero was teaching people how to. Sorry, I see a different slide on a tablet that's in front of me, and I got a little confused there, but I'm going to press on. Cicero was teaching people how to defend their lives in court, and he wanted, it was right in that moment, it was urgent and important, and he said, you need to teach truth, but you also need to delight and move. Those are the three components of effective public speech for him. And so we're focusing in this segment on writing for the ear that delights and that moves. And it may sound strange to spend time on delighting. I know some seminary students are very concerned with the serious business of teaching and persuading and convicting and getting a decision and getting people to take their discipleship more seriously. And that is all really important, and we do need to teach and move. But it's striking to me that Cicero, in teaching speakers how to speak to defend lives in court, said you need to delight them with your speech. So, because that will actually help you to teach and to move. So as we look at sermons that are written for the ear, these are 5 qualities that I want to focus on today, and we'll probably just get to the first 2 or maybe 3 in this segment. They are spoken into being. I want to encourage you to more and more speak your sermons into being. They may look different on the page, and they appeal to every sense through vivid speech. And we'll just go that far in this segment. So the first thing I want to call you to is to say your sermon aloud before it feels quote unquote done. When I learned kind of basic public speaking in high school, we talked about you write your speech and then you practice it. And it's a 2-part process. And I want to really encourage you to see it as more of a cyclical, iterative process where well before you think you're done, you get away from the keyboard, you print it out, or you just read it off your screen, whatever works for you. And it helps me to actually print it because I like to move to a different setting and stand up and pace around and say it out loud with some energy to it. So I don't find it very effective really to read it out loud at the key, right at my computer's area. But whatever works for you. And I'm listening for things like rhythm and where transitions are unclear. I'm listening for emotional effect. I'm listening for positive. I'm not just with a critical ear. I'm listening for, wow, that's nice. That's a good. That's a beautiful sound. I like the way those words flow together, and I'm noticing that something is that a phrasing is really good, and I think that could actually make a refrain at the end of each paragraph. That's a good line there. So be affirming as well as critical, and listen where things are getting a little too heady, a little too conceptual, and they need an illustration or an image to give people a handle, a grip on that truth. Listen for where transitions need strengthening. And I will say this will work even better if you can speak it aloud for a friend even before it's done. So if you have a trusted friend who's willing to listen to your preaching midstream, treat that person like gold. Give them good coffee. Keep them well caffeinated and happy with you. And take advantage of it. So the second thing is that preaching that is written for the ear will look different on the page, or it may. Some of you write and preach from a manuscript that just is written just like any other essay, and if that works for you, that's fine. I tend to be pretty good at memorizing, and so after a few practices, I have a very good sense of my manuscript, so it wouldn't really matter if I did something like writing it out like this or bringing it to bullet points and paring it down to one page. Those are things I encourage you to do if you need to work on more connection with your listeners and being more authentic and conversational. It doesn't happen to be something I need to work on just because I have a good facility for memory. But maybe in 10 years, come back to me on that one. But for now, for those of us who are working on our phrasing in the pulpit, our verbal phrasing, it can be very helpful for some of us to actually format our whole sermon with single sentences. And this is something that Traeger recommends, and Traeger and Tubbs Tisdale, who wrote the sermon workbook together. I just happen to know that this is one of Traeger's hallmark pieces. He is himself a poet, and he encourages writing in a more sort of poetic style where part of what he argues is that this helps you, it gives you accountability so that you can see when you're getting a long sentence, like that sentence at the bottom of the page. And he really encourages breaking your sentences up quite a bit. And they're going to give your word red line a workout, because they're going to think these aren't full sentences, and that's true. But you get away with that when you're preaching. So he goes on like that, and says that this method is a good tool, and I would encourage you to do it at least once in your sermons, and just for the learning that comes as you do it and what you'll become aware of about it. You can do a lot of other things with your formatting as well. You can put things in bold, you can put things in italics, you can put hash marks that show where you want to be sure you make a strong pause here. You can insert some smiley faces if your feedback from your first sermon is that you're a little too stern. You can put all caps for a section you want to highlight especially. So the next area that writing for the ear does well is that it appeals to the senses. And this is a beautiful piece by Brother Carper, who was an emancipated slave with almost 0 years of formal education. But as we read his description of this river that is whirling and gambling and melting out into each other, each of the ripples and eddies, like the smile of welcome on the face of a friend, before he do you a favor, seeming to say, we flow for all and flow on forever. But the texts speak of the river of life. I find that just a beautiful transition into, it's heightened my desire, almost my love of a river, and his description of it has just kind of welcomed me into a consideration of the river of life. So there's something that we, again, as we think about where we're one down we've talked about where we're one down compared to writing for the eye, and that people can't go back and reread. This is where we're one down compared to art or movies, which can, really literally give us the visual. So we rely on words. We can, of course, put up pictures and PowerPoints, or if we're a wealthy church, can have an artist in residence making paintings while we preach or things like that. But in general, we rely on our wordcraft to bring vivid imagery into the minds of our listeners. Anton Chekhov said, "Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass." And as you think about, so this is Barbara Brown Taylor reflecting on that as well, and just how she does that, and what it takes to do that is a little further reach. And when you're writing for academic papers, you're sometimes told, or you think you need to reach for the higher word, the more erudite, scholarly sounding word. And in preaching, what I'm asking you to do is reach for the more vivid word. Reach for the more imaginative, clear word that captures what you're looking for. Reach for the metaphor. And here she reaches for the metaphor of Luke as a doctor and his gospel as a medicine bag almost. And Jesus' gospel as medicine for our souls, which is very much an early church. The fathers taught that. Here I'm comparing two sentences to two descriptions of Zacchaeus, and this is borrowed from Richard Esslinger. These are a little bit dated, and so the second one doesn't quite carry the punch that it would if it were written in 2016, but I just think he's done a great job of crafting a side-by-side sort of comparison of how this works with. Here's a sentence that is packed with adjectives. Zacchaeus was very short, even for people of his day. When he came to see Jesus, the large and bustling crowd was impenetrable and huge. Then a brilliant idea hit him. He carefully climbed up an old sycamore tree and sat balanced on one of its sturdy limbs. Well, that gets the idea across, doesn't it? When we think about how will we add vivid description, our first thought is adjectives and a couple of adverbs too, carefully. So it certainly does convey what the author wants about Zacchaeus. But let's take a look at the second version. He says, watch Zacchaeus peering over the crowd, trying to glimpse, Rabbi Jesus. No, Shorty, he tells himself, this will never work. So there he is, out of costume for climbing trees. But look, he's hoisted himself up to that branch, and there he's perched, surveying the scene over the heads of all the people down below. Do you see the difference? He hasn't told us that Zacchaeus was short. He's shown us. He's given us dialogue. He's invited us first to watch, and so we're suddenly onlookers. We've been cast as characters in the scene. We're part of the crowd. We're not just readers. We're actually watchers, maybe at the back of this crowd, and we see Zacchaeus up in this tree, and we hear this little bit of dialogue that he does. Now that is a perfect example of what I mean of how good writing gives you a platform for good delivery, because you can always deliver dialogue with more emotion than just the flat speech of a sentence full of adjectives. No, Shorty, this will never work. Can just be delivered with more dynamism than Zacchaeus was very short, even for men of his day. And so there he is. See, he's taken us into the moment, into the scene, and he's hoisted. He's all of these adjectives. He's hoisted himself. He's perched. He's surveying. It's conveying the imagery through verbs and dialogue and lively description of the moment itself. That took more effort to write than the first one, and I would argue that it is much more lively, engaging, and powerful. This is a skill, and it will take some intentionality for some of us to learn how to do this. And so my encouragement to you is there any place where you're describing a character where you could insert dialogue that will convey the emotions, the tension, their internal state? That will be more powerful than simply telling us that they were scared or tired. This is just another example of lots of verbs in a lively sentence. But so we will end this segment with a reflection and response time. And so what I'm going to ask you to do this time, I hope that you are a ways into your first sermon writing, and so I hope that you will, or maybe your second, I'm not sure at what point you're listening to this piece. It's the beauty of the asynchronous life we all have here. So what I want to encourage you to do, and I hope you have a page of your sermon, was my point there. If you have a page ready, I want you to read it aloud and rate it for liveliness, interest, and clarity. We're going to talk a little more about clarity in the second segment, but then I want you to play around with formatting. Are there 5 sentences in this page, on this page, that you could chop in half and see how they read better? See how just giving that full stop break of a period cues you to take a breath and to pause. Could you take a couple paragraphs of it and format them in the Traeger way with 1 sentence per line and very short sentences? They're really phrases, aren't they? Could you play around with some bold, some italics, some caps, some smiley faces, some slice marks to cue pausing? Could you do just play around with inserting several things like that into it, and then reflect a little on what do you need to grow in as a writer for the ear based on what we've talked about so far. All right, we'll come back and continue talking about how to edit for the ear in a moment.